You ever get that feeling that, even with all our incredible progress, we're kind of losing something essential along the way? Well, today, we're going to dig into a powerful lecture from way back in 1898 that diagnosed this exact problem and offered a pretty surprising solution for the future.
I mean, look at that question. It feels like it could have been tweeted out this morning, right? But nope. This comes from over a century ago. A Dutch thinker, Abraham Kuyper, was looking around at his world and saw this huge paradox developing, this tension between all the stuff we were gaining on the outside and what we were losing on the inside. He felt it defined the modern age.
So, in a series of lectures at Princeton, of all places, Cooper makes this really radical argument. He says, look, society is standing on the edge of a cliff, and the key to navigating the future isn't some new invention or philosophy. It's actually a return to an old idea, Calvinism. But, and this is a huge but, reimagined not as some stuffy church doctrine, but as a complete life system.
Okay, so before he can offer his prescription, Kuyper first has to diagnose the illness. And he starts with this really sharp, no-holds-barred look at the spiritual sickness he believed was plaguing the modern world, from the inside out. And here is the deep contradiction he pointed to. On the one hand, humanity was doing amazing things. We were getting immense control over nature. Life was more comfortable. We were connecting the globe, living longer, healthier lives. Awesome, right? But on the other hand, he saw the inner life just withering away. He saw this spiritual decay, this rise of pessimism from thinkers like Schopenhauer, and this almost desperate cry from Nietzsche for an overman to come save us from our own spiritual emptiness.
Yeah, he really did not mince words. He saw all the external shine of the modern era as just a mask for a deep internal decay. He even compared his time to the final days of the Roman Empire, glittering on the outside but totally decadent and crumbling from within. So, where did all this rot come from? Well, for Kuyper, the source was clear: the French Revolution. Now, he admired its goal of liberty, but he argued its execution became a passion of wild emancipation. It didn't just unfasten society from old institutions, but from the very idea of a divine anchor. It cut the line. So, if society was spiritually sick, what were the available cures? Well, Kuyper systematically went through the main options of his day, and one by one, he found them all lacking. His first target was the liberal theology that was getting popular. He argued that it had basically watered everything down to make it more palatable to the modern mind. Sin isn't really sin, it's just a lack of development. Christ isn't a divine savior, just a religious genius. And redemption is basically just you changing your mind. By getting rid of its core beliefs, he said, it became powerless. He called it a dam giving way before the first assault. It just had no strength, no foundation. Now, his view of Roman Catholicism was really nuanced. On one hand, he saw it as a crucial ally against the rising tide of atheism. I mean, it defended theism, the deity of Christ, the atonement, all core stuff. But on the other hand, he saw it as a lower stage of development. He'd point to the social and political state of Catholic nations at the time and argue that its power was clearly fading on the world stage. For him, it was a bulwark, but not a vanguard. It could hold the line, but it couldn't lead the way forward. Finally, he looked at what he saw as these one-sided movements. You've got purely practical philanthropy, just doing good works. Noble, for sure, but without a clear gospel to share, he felt it lacked a soul. And then at the other extreme, you have pure mysticism, which is all about your inner experience. But that's too reclusive, too disconnected from the world to actually solve society's problems. Both, he argued, were missing a key piece of the puzzle. So, after systematically dismantling all the alternatives, Kuyper was ready to present his own solution. And it was a big one: a powerful, dynamic return to the core principles of Calvinism. Now, this wasn't a call to retreat into the past. This was a four-step plan for the future. First, strengthen the influence Calvinism still had. Second, go back to its living root and really study its core principles. Third, and this is so crucial, apply those principles creatively to the problems of modern life. And finally, churches need to stop being ashamed of their beliefs and confess them boldly. Okay, this brings us to the philosophical heart of Cooper's entire argument. He framed the central conflict of the modern age as this epic battle between two powerful ideas: election versus selection. He says that every single worldview, in the end, has to answer this one fundamental question: why is there inequality and difference in the universe? Why is a rose different from a mushroom? Why is one person born into wealth and another into poverty? Where do all these differences come from? And this slide just captures the two competing visions perfectly. On the left, you've got the modern worldview of selection, which was heavily inspired by Darwinism. The source of everything is just blind, random natural forces. The result is a furious, chaotic struggle where the strong just happen to crush the weak by chance. There's no reason to it. On the right, you have Calvinism's election. Here, the source is a sovereign, purposeful God. The result isn't despair, but peace, because it suggests nothing is random, not even suffering. The logic is that God is like a potter, and he has a specific design and purpose for every piece of clay. So you see, the crucial point here is that this was not just some abstract theology for Kuyper. For him, the doctrine of election was the only firm foundation for meaning and peace in a world that looks so starkly different and unfair. It was a direct answer to the anxiety and despair that comes from believing you're just a victim of random cosmic chance.
Kuyper concludes his lecture, and he doesn't do it with a fiery call to arms. Instead, he ends with this beautiful and actually very humble metaphor for how this change might come about. He compares his worldview to an Aeolian harp. That's an instrument that only makes music when the wind blows through it. He argued that true revival is like the wind. It comes from God. We can't force it. But, he says, our duty is to prepare the instrument. Our job is to study our principles, to get our worldview in order, and to have our harp tuned up and ready, just waiting for that divine breath to make music once again. And that brings us to a final provocative question. Over a century after Kuyper presented his case, what is the foundational principle that's shaping our world? Is it the blind struggle of selection, the purposeful design of election, or maybe something else entirely? To use his metaphor, what's the wind that's blowing through our harp today?